Hello students, welcome to Byju's IAS. In this particular video, we'll have a discussion related to what is the importance of the subject of economy or Indian economy in UPSC exams, and what should be your approach for countering the questions which are asked not only in the prelims but also in the mains on this particular subject. First and foremost, in case of UPSC exams, understand this, there's a very huge importance that has been given for Indian economy or the idea of the economy in terms of questions being asked. If you see this particular trend, again, you don't have to mug up how many questions have appeared in which year. The general trend is generally more than 15 questions are asked on the subject of economy. Now, please understand the next point also. These particular 15 questions are basically from the static part as well as the dynamic part of the portion or the syllabus. Now, what is the basic idea of a static and dynamic? If I want to replace single terms with respect to these particular terms here, dynamic is nothing but current affairs, and a static is nothing but what you read in the books. So, in case of UPSC, the questions are asked from the dynamic area of the economy as well as the static area of the economy. But the combination of this has kept on varying over a period of time. Earlier, the number of questions which are asked strictly from the current affairs perspective were generally higher compared to the questions which are asked from the static part, that is strictly from the books. But in the recent times, this particular trend is changing, but that is not the guarantee to say that questions will only come from the books that you are going to read. No, that is not the correct approach for UPSC exams, especially for a subject of Indian economy. Understand the idea here. Yes, it might so happen, again I'm underlining the term, it might so happen that majority of the questions will be from the static part in the prelims. You can get through that. But you will definitely face an issue if you are not reading the current affairs in the mains. Because in the mains, generally it has been seen that very high weightage has been given on Indian economic questions, or especially the questions from the current affairs. For example, GST, goods and services tax. You don't have to mug it up right now because we'll discuss the idea of a GST in detail in later part. The concept of a GST, goods and service tax, is very, very important. If you see the previous year question papers, there will definitely be at least one question on GST in the prelims and one question on GST in the mains. For example, very recently, there was a lot of discussion with respect to compensation under the ambit or under the idea of a GST. There was a lot of discussion happening related to this. Suddenly, UPSC asked the implication of the implementation of reforms such as GST on the financial relation between center and state. They also asked a question on the compensation issue which is plaguing or which is happening between central government and state government. So understand this. Yes, the combination of the static and dynamic number of questions may vary from one year to next year, but based on that particular parameter itself, please do not start your preparation for UPSC, especially in the subject of Indian economy. Because what happens is UPSC is very unpredictable. In some of the years, he might simply ask a large number of questions from the static part and a few number of questions from the dynamic part. But that doesn't mean that he's going to continue with the same trend next year also or this year also. He might simply reverse the trend and ask a majority of the questions from the current affairs, one or two questions from the static part. Is that possible? Definitely yes. This is how UPSC has been referred as an unpredictable public service commission. So my recommendation to you people is, please do not try to differentiate everything in Indian economy into static and dynamic. Please have a wholesome approach, or please have a very, very comprehensive approach related to idea of study of Indian economy. Yes, there are certain modules which we will see in just a couple of minutes. There are certain modules which are basically filled with the idea of a static part itself. But UPSC will ask questions from the static part of these particular module or other modules where the dynamic approach is much, much higher or dynamic aspect is much more important. Anything can be done by UPSC. Now, what you must study for the UPSC exam under the concept of Indian economy. Strictly speaking, for prelims, no defined syllabus has been provided by UPSC. And in the mains, yes, syllabus has been provided. But if you see the syllabus, there are only one word in each of these particular chapters. That is, in chapter, he'll simply say investment modules. But he will not tell you what you're supposed to read under investment modules. He will use a term such as subsidies. But under subsidies, what is the all the concepts that you're supposed to read? There are indications here and there, and you will have to understand what is important from which chapter based on the previous year questions. That will give a very good indicator of what actually is the boundary for these particular modules. Now, in this particular approach with respect to Indian economy, after end of every chapter, this will be the approach. After end of every module or every chapter, we'll look at the questions which have been asked in the prelims as well as mains from this particular chapter. Having said so, understand this, in mains, there will be certain doubts with respect to whether this particular question is strictly from this particular module or this particular chapter or this particular chapter. Because in case of the Indian economy, these particular concepts are all interrelated. For example, manufacturing sector, don't you think it is having a direct impact on employment generation? And don't you think manufacturing sector has a direct impact on GDP growth rate also? So UPSC might simply ask a question on the connection between all the three. Or he might simply ask a question where you need to explain the connection between all the three. And what are the issues presently in the Indian economy and why there is a very low growth rate, especially in the last couple of months. So where will you keep this particular question, strictly speaking, from the differentiation perspective or the division perspective? Will you put this particular question under employment? Will you put this particular question under GDP growth rate? Will you put this particular question under industries? So understand this, after end of every chapter, this is the approach that we will take some of the previous year questions both in the prelims as well as in mains. And we'll try to analyze the previous year questions and we'll try to understand what is the logic of the mains question and how do you approach these kind of mains based questions. With these particular caveats, let's have a look at the syllabus here. And again, you don't have to mug up the syllabus. The headlines are not important here. We will discuss all of these particular modules individually. That is what I want to convey to you people in the discussion related to syllabus. First, we'll start with the basic idea of an introduction. Now, many of you would have heard of two terms here, microeconomics and macroeconomics. And those who are already from the economics background would have already known the concept. But for the UPSC exams, which is important? What do you think is the importance related to microeconomics? What do you think is the importance related to macroeconomics? And if you're hearing the words for the first time, please do not be worried. We'll discuss the idea of a micro and a macro when I take up the first module and start discussing there itself. As of now, I'm just giving you an outlay here. With respect to introduction, understand this, we'll discuss certain very important concepts under microeconomics. And from UPSC exams perspective, it is macroeconomics which is very, very important. Is it okay? From UPSC exam perspective, it is macroeconomics which is very, very important. That is a precise reason. Rest of the syllabus, for example, banking will have a macroeconomic approach, budgeting, macroeconomic approach, industries, a macroeconomic approach, subsidies will be a macroeconomic approach, inflation is a macroeconomic approach. So understand this. From the UPSC exams perspective, between micro and macro, macroeconomics is very, very important. But suddenly, once a while, what UPSC does is, it will pick up a question from the microeconomics and ask you in the prelims. Again, the idea related to macroeconomics is present in prelims also and mains also. But microeconomics is most of the times or in the last 10 years has been limited to the prelims itself. Right? For example, he might ask you a question on what do you mean by the law of supply, law of a demand, the application of it, market equilibrium, Angel's law, so on and so forth. So just to be on a safer side, what we are going to do is under the concept of introduction, we are going to discuss certain important concepts in the microeconomics in this particular module. Next, I'm pretty sure all of you heard of a concept of a GDP or the term GDP in the last couple of months. And if you have been reading newspaper, Guaranteed this particular term would appear in the newspaper at least once every day. At least once. It could be 10 times, it could be 2 times, it could be 5 times also. But at least once every day in the newspaper, this particular terminology, that is GDP, will always be present. Now, what do you mean by GDP? What is the calculation methodology for GDP? Why GDP is so important? Why there has been a lot of discussion with respect to the GDP in the recent times? You must have heard of the recession in the Indian economy, V-shaped recovery in the Indian economy. All of these particular concepts will be discussed under the ambit of national income aggregates. We'll discuss aggregates. Aggregates is nothing but a group. Okay. So we'll discuss aggregates such as a GDP, a gross domestic product, GNP, gross national product, NDP, net domestic product, NNP, net national product, per capita income, national income. So these are different aggregates, but out of these, the most important aggregate from the UPSC exam perspective will be GDP. And that will be our focus of discussion under this particular idea of a national income aggregates. Once we are done with this, we'll look at inflation. What do you mean by inflation? How inflation is measured? What is a WPI? What is CPI? What is the role of RBI in controlling inflation? What measures are taken by RBI? What measures are taken by Government of India? Right? What are the factors which induce inflation in the market? All of these will be discussed under the ambit of inflation. Next, another very important module, taxation. Please understand, under the ambit of a taxation, guaranteed questions have appeared in UPSC prelims as well as mains. And taxation and banking are two very important modules for the UPSC, both prelims as well as mains. So understand, under the ambit of taxation, we'll start with what is the basics of taxation. What do you mean by a tax? Why does government impose a tax? What is the importance of it? What are the important rules of a good taxation system? Basically, you would have come across good canons of taxation. What are the features of Indian taxation system? What is a direct tax? What is an indirect tax? What is a cess? What is a surcharge? What are the direct types of taxes? For example, corporate tax, income tax, GAR, MAT, so on and so forth. And what are the indirect taxes? For example, countervailing duty, surcharges, the anti-dumping duty, so on and so forth. And the most important one will be GST, goods and services tax. And once we have understood all of these particular taxes, we look at what are the issues in the taxation system in India. What reforms have been taken by the Government of India to address these particular issues? What committees have been set up? What recommendations have been provided? So on and so forth. That will be the coverage under this particular concept of a taxation. Once we are done with this, next one will be banking, RBI and NBFCs. Right? Banking and RBI are very, very important from exam perspective. We'll start with the bank as a structure or bank. What is the bank? What is the feature of a bank? What do you mean by money? Very often you would have come across terms such as a fiat money or a bank money, so on and so forth. What do you mean by all of this? What is the structure of a banking in India? What is the role of a RBI in the banking structure in India? What do you mean by monetary policy? How RBI plays a very important role in terms of a promotion of a growth, controlling inflation, forex reserve, so on and so forth. And finally, the concept of a NBFC, non-banking financial company, which have been there in the newspaper very recently for various reasons. What is the idea of a NBFC? Why NBFCs are important? What has been the issue with the functioning of NBFCs in the recent times? What reforms have been announced? And within this particular banking structure, we will also cover different types of banking units such as a payment bank. We'll cover small finance bank, cooperative bank, etc. Okay. So all of this will be covered in detailed manner in this particular chapter. After this, the concept of a fiscal policy, right, where we'll be discussing the idea of a budgeting of the government as well as the finance commission. Now, please understand, generally the UPSC will ask one question in this particular module in prelims as well as in mains. For example, recently 15th Finance Commission has submitted a report for the time duration of 2021 to 26. This becomes a very important part and parcel for your UPSC preparation now. So we'll discuss what is the idea of a budgeting, how government prepares a budget, what are the considerations, how the budget is passed, what do you mean by finance bill, what do you mean by appropriation bill, right? And what are the types of deficits in the budget? You must have heard of fiscal deficit, primary deficit, right? So on and so forth. We'll discuss all of these particular concepts under this particular module. Once we are done with this, we'll take up financial markets. What do you mean by stock market? What do you mean by bond market? That is basically equity market and debt market. What are the different issues plaguing these particular markets? What is IPO? What is FPO? What is a green bond? What is the issue in case of the mutual funds in India? All of these will be the points of coverage in this particular concept of a financial market. After this, we'll take a concept of a planning. And what is the concept of a plan? What do you mean by 5-year plans? Why India adopted this particular 5-year plan? What has happened in all these particular 5-year plans over a period of time? What is the evaluation of these particular plans? We'll discuss. And after this, we have shifted to concept of a Niti Aayog now. What is the basic difference between a planning commission, Niti Aayog? How Niti Aayog is much better as a structure compared to planning commission? What has been the performance of a Niti Aayog in the last couple of years? Right? We'll discuss all of these particular concepts under this particular module of a planning. And once we are done with this, we'll go to international trade. Under international trade, we'll discuss exchange rate, very very important. How the value of a dollar against rupees is determined, right? And what is the impact of let's say change in the value of a rupee against foreign currencies such as a dollar? How the RBI plays an important role in determining or in stabilizing the exchange rate in India. We'll discuss all of these particular concepts. And if there is any policy change in external market, such as a Federal Reserve of US, if they change any policy, what is the impact of that on exchange rate in India? We'll discuss all of these particular ideas under international trade. Once we are done with this, we'll also discuss a foreign trade policy. Some of the very important concepts such as RCEP, Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, which was there in the newspaper very recently. Idea of the MEIS scheme, RODTEP scheme, PLI scheme, so on and so forth. All of these will be covered under the ambit of international trade. Next will be the concept of subsidies. What do you mean by subsidies? What is the importance of a subsidy? Why does government provide a subsidy? If government is providing a subsidy, then what is the issue? What are the concerns related to subsidies? Next, what are the types of subsidies which have been provided? For example, there is a subsidy on LPG which is being wiped out by government of India now. There is a subsidy on fertilizers which they are trying to revamp now. There is an issue of a food subsidy. There is involvement of a WTO in India's food security system. What is the important issues related to WTO? Why there is a contention between the government of India and the government of USA with respect to food subsidies in India? We'll discuss all of these particular concepts under the ambit of subsidies. Next, agriculture and food processing. Another very important module with respect to UPSC exams. What is the issue of MSP? How do we calculate MSP? What is MSP in the first place? What has been the evolution of MSP in India? What is the importance of MSP? Then there is a concept of agriculture credit. What type of agriculture credit is provided? What is the role of the government in providing agriculture credit? You must also have come across a concept of the agriculture loan waiver. Right? We will cover all of these. Right? In addition to this, we will discuss a concept of a ENAM. What is the importance of ENAM? What is the concept of agriculture mechanization? Why it is important? And then we'll discuss idea for food processing. What is a food processing? Why it is important? What reforms have been taken by the government? What have been the issues in the food processing? That will be the scope of coverage in this particular module. Then we'll pick up industries and services. You must have heard of a manufacturing industry. You must have heard of a services sector. You must have heard of a export industry, exporting, importing. What is the issue here? What has been issue with the MSMEs? Government of India has implemented reforms such as Make in India, Startup India, Stand Up India. What are the issues? What they are trying to achieve through these particular policies? That will be the scope of coverage in this particular concept of industry and services. Next, we will discuss a concept of investment modules, where we will discuss PPP, public-private partnership, FDI and EFPI, foreign portfolio investment, foreign direct investment. We will discuss special economic zones. We will discuss national investment manufacturing zones. Once we have taken care of these particular investment modules, we will start discussing the idea of infrastructure in India. Infrastructure such as power infrastructure, very very important. We will discuss railways infrastructure. What have been the issues in the railways? Okay, we will also discuss the infrastructure under the ambit of ports also. Right, so these are some of the types of infrastructure that we will be covering in this particular module. Next, we'll discuss a very important concept of a poverty, but please understand the discussion will be focused on the economic aspects of poverty. For example, how do you define poverty? I'm pretty sure most of you will simply say, sir, if a person doesn't have enough food, enough clothing, enough housing, right, he'll be classified as a poor. But how do you define enough clothing? How do you define enough housing, enough food? Right, so there is a need of understanding the idea of a poverty under technical lens as such. How do you define poverty? In India, how do we find out who are poor, who are non-poor? There are technical terms such as a poverty line, above poverty line, below poverty line. You need to understand all of this. And once we have identified what do we do, what does government of India do, what does state government do with this particular poor population, what important reforms have been implemented at the central level in order to eradicate, in order to address poverty in India. Despite being more than 60 plus years in case of India's independence, why are we still struggling with the idea of eradicating poverty? Why there's so much of population lying in the poverty? We'll discuss all of this under the ambit of poverty model. Next one is employment, right? What is the basic idea of a employed person, unemployed person, labor force, workforce? What do you mean by demographic dividend? What has been the issue with respect to employment in India? Why do we say that in the last 1 decade India is experiencing a jobless growth? What reforms have been implemented? Where are we falling short with respect to these reforms? Very recently, Government of India has announced rationalization of a 4 labor codes, right? There are 4 labor codes, code on wages, code on social security, so on and so forth. We'll discuss all of these particular issues under this particular model. And then there is a model with respect to inclusive growth. What do you mean by inclusive growth? How are we trying to achieve inclusive growth? Has India achieved inclusive growth? Then what are the issues? Despite implementing so many reforms, why are we still struggling with the idea of inclusive growth in India? Right? All of this will be covered in this particular model. So this is basically what we'll be discussing in this particular the whole next set of videos as such. Now, next important question that you will have, sir, if you are saying that we are supposed to read all of this, what are our references? From where we must take the notes from, or from where we should get the notes from? Now, these are the references. Please understand, for sake of convenience, I've divided these references into static references, or the reference related to static part, and references related to dynamic part. With respect to static and as well as the dynamic, you can refer the institution books as well as the tablet. The books will take care of the static part for you. The webinars will take care of the dynamic part. The YouTube videos will also take care of the dynamic part. Right? So institution books as well as tablet are important for understanding the static part as well as the dynamic part. Now, in terms of the static part itself, my recommendation is please read these particular 4 NCERT books. These are very basic books, very small books also. From ninth class, there is a book on economics titled Economics itself. In the 10th class, there is a book titled Understanding Economic Development. 11th class, Indian Economic Development. And in the 12th class, there are 2 books, Micro and Macro. Please do not read microeconomics, right? Again, the concept is cost to benefit analysis for UPSC exam. I know most of you have a very limited amount of time, and within this particular limited amount of time, whatever efforts you want to put, you want maximum benefits from these particular efforts. So in terms of a cost to benefit analysis or ratio for the microeconomics, it's very, very low. Whatever we are going to discuss in the tablet with respect to microeconomics, more than sufficient to address the questions which are asked in UPSC, which you will understand when I discuss as well as show you what kind of questions have been asked and analyze these particular questions. You will be more convinced with respect to this particular idea. So from the class 12th, macroeconomics, more than sufficient with respect to static part along with this. What about the dynamic aspect of the Indian economy? Right, these are the references. Please read one national daily, any daily, either Hindu or Indian Express. Along with this, there are 2 magazines which is published monthly by government. That is a Yojana as well as Kurukshetra. Please ensure that you are up to date with respect to reading of these particular magazines. Many of the times it has been seen that UPSC will pick up direct questions from the government documents itself. For example, Yojana and Kurukshetra. In addition to this, there is a budget and economic survey. My recommendation is read at least the gist part of it. At least gist part of it. Okay, you want to read more than that? always welcome. So budget, economic survey, the gist as well as the videos related to these two the documents as such. And another very important document published annually by Government of India, India Yearbook. India Yearbook is very important for a simple reason. Some of the data which appears in India Yearbook is usually used by UPSC, or the question which is asked by UPSC can easily be answered through the understanding of this particular data. For example, question on schemes. Every year in UPSC prelims as well as mains, there have been questions on the schemes. What is the valid reference for you with respect to these particular schemes? It will be the government data itself. For example, these particular schemes will be discussed in the India Yearbook. In addition to this, the current affairs related to these particular schemes will keep on appearing in the newspapers, and it will also keep on appearing in Press Information Bureau, that is PIB website. So this will take care of the dynamic coverage for the Indian economy paper in the UPSC exam. So this is a basic discussion with respect to the syllabus as well as the references that you're supposed to do with respect to UPSC exam on Indian economy paper. Thank you.